The alarm died mid-scream. Admiral Liana Vareth's hand hovered over the emergency cutoff, trembling in the crimson lighting of the command deck. 6 months ago, Titan Station. The memory played like corrupted footage, skipping frames, stuttering on the moments that mattered most. The holographic display had been clean then, clinical. 700,000 tons of colony infrastructure rotating against the black. Population counter in the corner. 847 souls. Military personnel, engineers, medical staff, able American citizens, 200 million miles from home. The enemy fleet had been closing. 43 ships. Overwhelming force. Standard protocol dictated the response. Evacuate critical military assets. Engage the enemy while they're distracted with the station. Turn their brutality into tactical advantage. It was efficient, it was logical. It had been approved by committee, signed by 3 generals, vetted by probability matrices that put success rates at 87%. Liana had hesitated for exactly 4 seconds. Then she'd given the order. Commence Titan Protocol. 2 words, 8 syllables, 847 lives. The memory shattered as Liana jerked awake in her quarters, chest heaving, sheets soaked with sweat. The chronometer read 021 in 7 hours. Same time every night. Her subconscious had perfect timing. She sat up slowly, muscles protesting. 48 years old, and her body felt twice that. Not from physical wear. Command aged you from the inside out, calcifying around decisions you couldn't take back. The lights responded to her movement, rising to a soft amber that didn't quite reach the corners. Her quarters aboard the USC flagship Citadel were designed for efficiency, not comfort. Sleeping alcove, desk, viewport showing the rust-orange curve of Mars below. Everything regulation, everything controlled. Everything except the holographic display she'd left running. 847 names scrolled in endless loop. Alphabetical, fair, democratic in death. Abbott, James R.O. Engineering specialist, second class Ackerman, Sarah M. Medical technician, Adams, Michael D. Weapon systems operator. Liana watched them scroll. She'd memorized every name months ago, but repetition had become ritual. Penance without absolution. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. That was new, or perhaps she'd simply stopped noticing. The human body adapted to almost anything, given time, even guilt. She stood, bare feet silent on the deck plating, and moved to the viewport. Mars turned beneath the Citadel's orbit, ancient and indifferent. Somewhere down there in the underground warrens of Olympus Mons, there were families who didn't know yet that their grief had been efficient, tactically sound, approved by committee. Liana pressed her palm against the viewport, feeling the faint vibration of the ship's systems through the reinforced glass. 1 trillion tons of American military engineering, and she could feel its heartbeat. But she couldn't feel the 847 anymore. That was the problem. She'd tried. God knew she'd tried. Late-night review of personnel files, studying their faces, reading their service records, trying to attach humanity to data points. But the mind protected itself. Names became abstractions again. Faces faded into reports. Until 3 months ago when she'd made a mistake. She'd accessed the after-action reports, not the sanitized versions filed for the Admiralty, the raw combat logs, transcripts from soldiers on the ground, unfiltered, unedited, real. One report had seized her attention and refused to let go. Captain Marcus Callahan, call sign, Reaper, sole survivor of Fireteam Echo, Keros Gate Offensive, listed as KIA for 6 hours before biometric ping confirmed survival. Extracted with third-degree plasma burns across 40% of his body, 3 collapsed organs, shrapnel in 17 locations, and a survival probability the medical AI had calculated at 12%. He'd lived anyway. The report noted his first words upon regaining consciousness. Did we get them out? Them. The civilians trapped behind Keros Gate when the plasma barriers failed. The barriers that failed because Liana's predecessor had approved a budget cut, prioritizing fleet expansion over infrastructure maintenance. The civilians that Captain Callahan had stayed behind to evacuate, even as the gate collapsed around him. 43 civilians survived Keros Gate, 87 USC soldiers did not. The casualty mathematics haunted her differently than Titan Station. Titan had been a command decision, macro scale, the kind you made from orbit. Karos Gate had been men and women on the ground, breathing smoke and making choices in real time while the world burned around them. She'd started studying Callahan's file then, not officially. There was no protocol for what she was doing, no regulation that covered an admiral developing an obsession with a captain she'd never met. 12 major campaigns, 43 confirmed kills, 89 documented combat injuries, ranging from minor shrapnel wounds to catastrophic trauma, 4 separate instances of being declared KIA before biometric confirmation of survival, a service record so densely packed with commendations and insubordination charges that the file had needed expansion twice. And through it all, a pattern she couldn't ignore. Captain Callahan survived what should have killed him by repeatedly choosing to protect others when protocol said to save himself. The kind of soldier the modern military didn't know what to do with. The kind of soldier Liana desperately needed to understand. Because somewhere in those 89 scars was the answer to a question she didn't know how to ask. Something about consequence, about the space between issuing orders and living with their results. She pulled up his file now for perhaps the 100th time. The official portrait showed a man in his early 30s, dark hair cut to regulation, gray eyes that seemed older than his face. Irish heritage, Montana-born, enlisted at 16 with falsified biometric clearance. Father KIA in the colony wars. Mother deceased, medical complications from off-world radiation exposure. No siblings, no spouse. Emergency contact. Vacant. A soldier with nothing to lose except the people he chose to protect. Liana made her decision. At 0243 hours, she composed the summons. Direct from the Admiral's office. No chain of command, no advance warning. Captain Marcus Callahan. Immediate compliance required personal inspection. 0600 hours. Admiral's private chambers, Section 7 Alpha, attendance mandatory. She sent it before doubt could recalculate the odds. Then she sat in the amber darkness, watching Mars turn, and wondered what she was really summoning. A soldier who'd survived the unsurvivable? A witness to her failures? Or simply someone who might understand what it felt like to carry weight that spreadsheets couldn't quantify? The chronometer advanced. 0244, 0245, 0246. At 0300 hours, she began to prepare. 3 decks down and half a kilometer spinward, Marcus Callahan was losing an argument with a robot. Your vital signs indicate persistent arrhythmia, elevated cortisol levels, and tissue damage consistent with inadequate recovery time, the medical drone announced. Its mechanical voice somehow managing to sound judgmental. It hovered at eye level, scanning him with red spectrum sensors that made his skin itch. Protocol mandates 48 hours minimum rest before return to active duty. Protocol can file a complaint. Marcus sat on the edge of the medical bay cot, pulling his boots back on. 6 months in the frontier zones had left them scarred and scorched, but they still fit. Some things you didn't replace. I'm ambulatory. That counts as recovered. That is not how human physiology works, Captain. Been working fine for 32 years. Statistical analysis suggests you are an outlier. Marcus grinned without humor. That's what they tell me. The drone bobbed in what might have been mechanical exasperation, then injected something fluorescent into his arm before he could protest. Metabolic accelerator. This will mitigate the immediate damage. It will not prevent the long-term consequences of chronic combat exposure. Appreciate the concern, Doc. Marcus stood, testing his weight. The left knee clicked. The right hip ached. The scar tissue across his ribs pulled tight when he breathed deep. Standard operating condition. We done here? You are never done here, Captain. You simply refuse to stay long enough to heal. The drone zipped away before Marcus could respond, leaving him alone in the sterile white of the medical bay. Through the reinforced window, he could see the Citadel's interior architecture. Corridors branching like neural pathways, personnel moving with purpose, holographic displays updating tactical information in real time. Home, or the closest thing he had to one. He'd been aboard the Citadel for exactly 6 hours. Just long enough to file his after-action report, submit his weapons for inspection, and get ambushed by the medical AI that apparently tracked personnel health with predatory efficiency. The plan had been simple: sleep for 12 hours, check equipment, review mission parameters for the next deployment. Standard rotation. Predictable. Then the summons arrived. It materialized in the air before him as he left medical, holographic text with the Admiral's seal. Marcus read it twice, certain he'd misunderstood. Personal inspection, Admiral's chambers, immediate compliance. He'd been in the service long enough to know that when an admiral personally summoned a captain, it was never good news. Court-martial, classified, reassignment, notification of loss. The good stuff came through your CO, wrapped in proper chain of command protocol. The personal touch meant something had gone wrong. Marcus ran through the possibilities as he navigated the corridors towards Section 7 Alpha. Had he violated engagement protocols in the last campaign? Probably. Did his after-action report contradict official narratives? Almost certainly. Had he technically disobeyed a direct order to achieve mission objectives? That was kind of his signature move. But court-martial usually came with more warning. And if they wanted to reassign him, they wouldn't need the Admiral herself. Which left the uncomfortable option. Something about him, specifically, had drawn command attention. That was never good. The corridors changed as he walked. Rough welded battle plating gave way to smooth composite. Bare functionality transformed into deliberate design. He passed through 2 biometric checkpoints, each one scanning deeper than the last. Retinal, genetic, neural pattern verification. By the time he reached the 3rd checkpoint, he understood. This wasn't just the command section. This was the inner circle, the place where decisions got made and justified later. The gravity shifted subtly as he entered Section 7 Alpha. Artificial, tuned to Earth normal instead of the energy-efficient zero point 0.8 standard they ran on the lower decks. His knees appreciated it. The rest of him felt the weight increase. The corridor terminated at a seamless door that looked more like a suggestion than a barrier. No guards, no visible security, just empty hallway and expensive architecture that screamed, "You're not supposed to be here." Marcus checked his uniform. Regulation, mostly. The jacket had scorch marks the laundry system couldn't quite eliminate. His boots were frontier-worn. The service ribbons on his chest included 3 he wasn't technically supposed to display outside classified briefings. Not exactly parade-ready. The door sensed his approach and began to open. No announcement, no ceremony. Just molecular-level matter rearrangement that probably cost more than his annual salary. Admiral Liana Veyras' private chambers existed in direct contradiction to every regulation about officer quarters he'd ever read. The space was vast. Floor-to-ceiling viewport dominated one wall, showing Mars in full glory, rust-orange clouds swirling across Valle Marineris. The furniture was minimal, a desk that looked carved from single piece of dark wood, a few chairs that prioritized form over comfort, and a raised platform in the center of the room surrounded by dormant holographic projectors. And standing near the viewport, hands clasped behind her back, perfectly still, the Admiral. Marcus had seen her before, obviously. Personnel briefings, fleet-wide addresses, always on screens, always distant, always composed. Seeing her in person was different. She was shorter than he expected, maybe 5'7" without the boots. Her uniform was immaculate, tailored precisely, with the 4 stars on her collar catching the ambient light, dark hair pulled back severely, pale skin that suggested too many years in recycled air, and eyes that... She turned to face him, and Marcus revised his assessment. Those weren't the eyes of someone who'd spent too long in space. Those were the eyes of someone who'd witnessed something they couldn't reconcile. Captain Callahan. Her voice carried the trained neutrality of command, but something underneath suggested she'd been awake too long. "You're early." "Force of habit, ma'am." He remained at attention. Showing up late to a personal summons from an admiral seemed unwise. One corner of her mouth almost moved. Practical. "I try." Silence settled between them. Not comfortable, not hostile. Evaluative. Liana studied him with an intensity that made Marcus's combat instincts itch. This wasn't a casual review. She was looking for something specific. Cataloging, measuring. "At ease, Captain." She gestured toward the platform. "This is a post-campaign physical inspection. After every major deployment, I personally examine commanding officers in the field. You're overdue. Marcus blinked. Ma'am, I just came from medical. The drone was very thorough. The drone scanned for immediate threats to operational capacity. Liana moved to a console, fingers dancing across holographic controls. I assess for comprehensive combat effectiveness. There's a difference. The platform hummed to life, holographic arrays activating in sequence. Diagnostic fields washed over Marcus in waves. Thermal, electromagnetic, biological. He felt the familiar tingle of deep tissue scanners. With respect, Admiral, this seems beyond standard protocol. It is. She didn't look at him, focused on the cascade of data appearing in the air around her. But I find standard protocol often misses critical information. Marcus wanted to ask what information, specifically, but junior officers didn't question admirals, even when those admirals were acting distinctly non-standard. Step onto the platform, Captain. He complied, boots clicking on the raised surface. The room hummed louder, systems activating with purpose, holographic arrays, diagnostic fields, scanners tuned to both human biology and technologies that most doctors only pretended to understand. Marcus felt suddenly aware of every ache he'd been ignoring for weeks. He resisted the urge to joke about it, mostly because the machines were already doing enough judging. Remove your armor, Liana said. Marcus froze. Ma'am? Your armor. Remove it. I'm not wearing armor. This is standard. The combat gear beneath your uniform, Captain. The reinforced underlayer. The systems integration. All of it. Her eyes were steady, uncompromising. I need baseline assessment. This had officially crossed from unusual to concerning. Emerald, that's an order. The words hung in the expensive air of her chambers. Not angry, not threatening, just absolute. Marcus hesitated for exactly 2 seconds, running threat calculations out of pure habit. Then he reached for the release at his shoulder. The first piece disengaged with a familiar hiss, gravitic fields within the platform catching it, floating it gently aside. The shoulder guard, scorched along the top edge from plasma splash at Meridian Station. The chest plate came next, composite armor that had stopped 3 rounds and deflected a knife. The knife marks were still visible. Piece by piece, the protection came away. Each segment telling its own story in scratches, burns, and dents that the repair crews never quite buffed out. Liana watched in silence. Her expression had shifted, the professional distance cracking at the edges. When the outer layer cleared, the undersuit became visible. Supposedly white, actually a patchwork of repairs and carbon scoring, sewn back together so many times it barely qualified as original equipment. Marcus caught Liana's expression shift, her jaw tightening, eyes widening fractionally. Captain, how long have you been using this undersuit? 4 years, ma'am. Gets replaced when it stops working. It should stop working every 6 months. I maintain it well. You've repaired it in 17 different locations. Marcus shrugged. Field expedients. The diagnostic holograms erupted then, flooding the space with data. Numbers and graphs mapping damage, repair, probability matrices, calculating things Marcus preferred not to think about. And then, in stark red numerals rotating slowly at eye level, combat injuries detected. 89. Liana's hands stopped moving. She stared at the number like it had personally accused her of something unforgivable. 89. Her voice had lost its command timbre. Sounded almost human. The file said, I thought there was an error in the data compilation. It's accurate, ma'am. Marcus kept his tone neutral. Medical histories were always awkward. Some are minor. Shrapnel fragments too small to justify extraction. Couple of burns that didn't fully heal. Nothing that impacts operational readiness. Liana slowly walked closer, her eyes tracking the holographic overlays appearing around his body. Each injury site highlighted. Each scar mapped with clinical precision. She stopped near a cluster of alerts at his left side, hovering in the air like accusatory ghosts. Keros Gate, she whispered. Marcus tensed. Ma'am? This wound. She pointed, hand trembling, almost imperceptibly. Plasma burns, 40% body coverage, 3rd-degree severity, corresponds to the Keros Gate breach. Her eyes lifted to his. My predecessor signed that offensive order, the one that deprioritized barrier maintenance to fund fleet expansion. The room felt suddenly smaller. Standard tactical allocation, ma'am. Resources are finite. 43 civilians survived Karos Gate because you stayed behind. Liana's voice had dropped to something barely above breath. The report said you were listed as KIA for 6 hours. Administrative error. Happens more than you'd think. It's not an error when your biometrics flatline, Captain. Marcus said nothing. There wasn't really a good response to that. Liana moved closer, close enough that Marcus could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the way her pupils dilated slightly as she studied the holographic wound maps overlaying his physical form. These aren't just injuries, she said quietly. They're decisions. Someone, somewhere decided that tactical efficiency was worth this. She gestured at the rotating 89. Worth you. I volunteered for every deployment, ma'am. That doesn't absolve the people who ordered you there. Something in her voice made Marcus look at her, really look at her. The Admiral's mask had fallen away entirely. What remained was something raw and unsteady. Permission to speak freely, Admiral? Granted. This isn't standard protocol, is it? Liana laughed. It sounded broken. No, Captain. This is not standard protocol. She turned away, moving back to the viewport. Mars rotated beneath them, indifferent and eternal. I give orders from this ship, she said to the planet below. Orders that travel through layers of command, filtered through probability matrices and tactical algorithms. By the time they reach the battlefield, they're clean, abstract. She pressed her palm against the viewport. I am told what is lost in percentages, acceptable loss ratios, operational cost assessments. Marcus didn't respond, wasn't sure he should. 3 months ago, I started reading the unfiltered reports. Liana's reflection in the glass looked older than her physical form. After-action logs, combat transcripts, medical assessments written by people who'd just watched their friends die. She turned back to him. Your name appeared 17 times. I've been in the service a while, ma'am. You've been surviving what should kill you for 16 years. She moved toward him again, deliberate. Why? Why what? Why survive? Why volunteer for the impossible missions? Why stay behind at Karos Gate when you had authorization to evacuate? Marcus considered his answer carefully. Someone has to. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have, ma'am. Liana stopped directly in front of him, close enough that he could see the fine lines around her eyes, the way her hands flexed unconsciously at her sides. I have commanded fleets for 12 years, she said. I have optimized casualty rates, improved tactical efficiency, won battles that analysts said were unwinnable. Her voice cracked slightly. And I cannot stop thinking about your 89 scars. The platform hummed around them, scanners still mapping, holograms still rotating. Somewhere deep in the Citadel, systems calculated probabilities and threat matrices. But in this room, in this moment, there was only an admiral who'd lost her professional detachment and a soldier who'd never had any to begin with. The medical assessment is complete, Liana said, but made no move to dismiss him. You're fit for continued service. No immediate threats to operational capacity. She paused. That's the official evaluation. And unofficially, ma'am? Unofficially, Captain Callahan, I would like you to remain aboard the Citadel. Not as a command obligation, as, she struggled with the word, a reminder. Marcus frowned. Reminder of what? That my orders have consequences I need to remember. She gestured at the holographic display of his injuries. That optimization and understanding are not the same thing. That every percentage point I save in mission planning costs blood from someone like you. Ma'am, I'm designing a new command doctrine. The words came out rushed, like she'd been holding them too long. Orders that account for human cost, not just tactical efficiency. But the Council will never approve it unless I can prove it works. Unless I can show them what current protocols actually cost. She met his eyes directly. I need a soldier who survived questionable orders to help me write better ones. Marcus stared at her. This had escalated beyond his ability to process. Admiral, I'm a trigger puller. I don't write policy. You're the survivor of 12 campaigns that should have killed you. You've won battles by ignoring orders when those orders would have gotten everyone killed. You've been court-martialed 4 times for insubordination and decorated 6 times for the exact same actions. Liana's intensity burned like directed energy. That's not a trigger puller, Captain. That's a man who understands the difference between orders and outcomes. The room felt like it was closing in. Marcus had faced overwhelming enemy forces, impossible odds, situations that defied survival. But this felt more dangerous than all of them. Because this was offering something he'd never allowed himself to want. The chance to make the questionable orders stop. Ma'am, the council isn't going to listen to a captain. They'll listen to the results. Liana pulled up a new holographic display. I've been analyzing combat data, missions where field commanders modified orders versus missions where they followed protocol exactly. The modifications have 40% lower casualty rates. And success rates? 12% lower. She smiled without joy. Because we measure success by objectives achieved, not people preserved. That's what I want to change. Marcus studied the data, his mind already running tactical assessments. The analysis told a story he'd lived but never quantified. Sometimes saving everyone meant not winning as fast. Sometimes winning fast meant not saving everyone. The military had chosen its priority. Liana was proposing to reverse it. This will end your career, Marcus said quietly. The council won't just reject this. They'll remove you. I know. My legacy is 857 people dead at Titan Station because I chose efficiency over evacuation. Her voice hardened. I would rather be remembered as the admiral who tried to change that than the one who perfected it. The door chime cut through the tension like plasma through hull plating. Liana's expression shifted instantly, professional mask slamming back into place. Enter. The door unsealed and Vice Admiral Thaddeus Kravik stepped through. Texas accent, hard eyes, 3 decades of command experience that showed in every movement. He took in the scene with military efficiency, Marcus on the platform, partially unarmored, surrounded by medical holograms. Liana standing too close, looking too intense. His expression curdled. Admiral Veyrath, Kravik's voice carried disapproval like a weapon. The council requires your presence. There are concerns about your recent behavior. Liana didn't flinch. What concerns? Delayed operations, unauthorized combat data analysis. And now, he gestured at Marcus, private meetings with junior officers in your personal chambers. This is a standard medical inspection, Admiral Kravik. In your quarters, at 0600 hours, without medical personnel present? Kravik's smile had no warmth. The council meets in 1 hour. I suggest you make yourself presentable, Admiral. And Captain, he looked at Marcus like something tracked in on dirty boots. You're dismissed. Marcus looked to Liana. She gave the slightest nod. He began collecting his armor, pieces floating back to him under the platform's control. Each segment locked into place with familiar clicks and hisses. Protection reforming, distance reestablishing. As he secured the last piece, Liana spoke quietly, just loud enough for him to hear beneath Kravik's impatient hovering. Think about my offer, Captain. Marcus met her eyes one last time, saw something there that reminded him why he'd kept surviving. The same thing that made him stay at Karos Gate. The same thing that made impossible odds feel like challenges instead of death sentences. Someone who gave a damn. Yes, ma'am. He left the Admiral's chambers with Kravik's disapproval burning into his back. Holographic medical data still rotating in the air behind him, and the uncomfortable certainty that he'd just witnessed something that was going to change everything. 3 decks down, as he returned to the barracks section, Marcus pulled up his personal log, stared at the list of names he'd kept for 16 years. 83 soldiers who died under questionable orders from various commanders. He'd never told anyone about the list, never expected anyone to care. But Admiral Veyrath had just offered to care, had just offered to make the list stop growing. Marcus added one more entry to his log. Veyrath Liana, Admiral USC Fleet Command status, attempting the impossible note. Might actually succeed. Then he closed the file, collected his gear, and prepared for whatever came next. Because in his experience, when an admiral decided to fight the system, everyone around them ended up in the blast radius. and Marcus Callahan had never been good at staying out of explosions. The council chamber existed to intimidate. 30 meters of vaulted ceiling, walls of dark composite that absorbed light and conversation equally. A circular table carved from asteroid material, seamless and cold, surrounded by 13 seats arranged in judgment formation. Holographic displays hovering like accusations waiting to materialize. Admiral Liana Vera stood at the center, lone. She'd been standing for 17 minutes, long enough for her legs to remind her about old injuries, long enough for the silence to evolve from tactical to theatrical. The council members sat in their high-backed chairs, reviewing data on personal displays, occasionally murmuring to each other, pointedly ignoring the admiral at room center. Dominance display, primate politics in a space-age wrapper. Liana kept her expression neutral, hands clasped behind her back, and waited. Losing patience was losing ground. They wanted her off balance, defensive, ready to justify instead of explain. She'd spent 12 years learning how to weaponize stillness. Finally, General Aldrich Rourke looked up from his display. 65 years old, 4 decades of service, chest full of citations earned when wars were still fought on Earth's surface. Silver hair cut military precise, eyes that had seen enough combat to recognize it in others. He studied Liana with the careful assessment of a man who'd spent his life evaluating threats. Admiral Veyrath, his voice carried the gravel of too many years breathing recycled air. You've been briefed on the purpose of this meeting? Vice Admiral Kravik indicated there were concerns, sir. Concerns, Rourke smiled without humor. That's one word for it. Kravik leaned forward, Texas accent sharpening. Admiral, in the past 90 days, you have delayed 3 major operations for what you termed tactical reassessment. Can you explain why Fleet Command protocols suddenly required your personal reinterpretation? Liana met his gaze directly. The original tactical assessments prioritized speed over comprehensive risk evaluation. I determined that additional analysis would improve operational outcomes. You determined. Kravik's emphasis made it an accusation. Without consulting your command staff, without submitting revised protocols through proper channels, you simply decided that 40 years of proven tactical doctrine needed your personal revision. The doctrine hasn't been revised in 40 years, Admiral. Perhaps that's the problem. The temperature in the room dropped 5 degrees. Rourke raised a hand before Kravik could respond. Admiral Veyrath, those 3 delayed operations were mission critical. Your reassessment created strategic gaps that enemy forces exploited. The Meridian Station raid failed because our fleet wasn't in position. We lost tactical advantage at the frontier edge because you held deployment for an additional 6 hours. We also didn't lose the 200 soldiers that original timeline would have cost, sir. You don't know that? Actually, sir, I do. Liana pulled up her own holographic display, data she'd been compiling for months. Probability matrices based on similar operations under similar conditions. The original Meridian deployment had an 82% mission success rate and a 47% casualty probability. My revised deployment achieved 78% success with 19% casualties. Kravik snorted. 4% lower success rate. You're proud of that? I'm proud that 168 soldiers went home to their families, Admiral. And the mission objectives that weren't achieved, the strategic positions we didn't secure, those don't matter. Liana felt the trap closing. They'd framed this perfectly. Success versus safety, victory versus survival. Binary choices designed to make her look weak. She'd expected this, prepared for it. Of course they matter, Admiral Kravik, which is why I've spent the last 3 months developing an updated tactical framework that accounts for both mission success and personnel preservation. That stopped the room. Rourke's eyes narrowed. You've developed a framework? Yes, sir, a comprehensive revision of engagement protocols that integrates human cost assessment into tactical planning. Real-time probability modeling that weighs not just objectives achieved, but long-term strategic capability preserved through reduced casualties. Human cost assessment. Kravik's tone suggested she'd just proposed using crystals for navigation. Admiral, we already have casualty projections in every tactical plan. We have acceptable loss percentages, sir. That's different. Liana expanded her display, showing comparative data. Current doctrine treats casualties as a resource expenditure. My framework treats them as a strategic asset that compounds over time. Soldiers who survive develop experience, institutional knowledge, tactical adaptability. One of the other council members spoke up. Admiral Patricia Sutherland, logistics specialist, sharp enough to see implications 3 moves ahead. You're proposing we prioritize preservation over achievement. I'm proposing we recognize that achievement without preservation is unsustainable, ma'am. Unsustainable. Rourke leaned back, fingers steepled. We've been prosecuting interstellar conflict for 50 years, using current doctrine, Admiral Veyrath. Seems fairly sustainable to me. With a 38% attrition rate among combat personnel annually, sir, we replace casualties faster than we develop competence. It's sustainable only because we have population reserves to burn through. Liana let that hang. For now, the implications rippled through the chamber. Earth's population was stable, but colony birth rates were declining. The math didn't favor indefinite war. Kravik recovered first. This is fascinating academic theory, Admiral. But unless you're suggesting we simply stop fighting, I'm suggesting we fight smarter. Liana pulled up combat logs, specific missions, timestamps highlighted. I've identified 47 engagements in the past 18 months where field commanders modified orders in real time and achieved better outcomes than planned. Better outcomes measured how? Sutherland asked. Lower casualties with comparable mission success. Liana isolated 3 examples. Lieutenant Commander Jackson at Phobos Station. Captain Torres during the asteroid belt interdiction. She paused. Captain Callahan at Karos Gate. She regretted the last name instantly. Kravik's smile turned predatory. Ah yes, Captain Callahan. Let's discuss him, shall we? The holographic display in the center of the chamber flickered. New imagery appeared. Security footage. Timestamp 0600 hours that morning. Liana's stomach dropped. The footage showed her private chambers. Marcus on the platform, surrounded by medical holograms. And the moment she'd moved closer, studying his injury patterns with intensity that looked nothing like professional assessment. The angle was perfect. The context was absent. The implication was devastating. This is Class B security footage from your personal quarters, Admiral. Kravik's voice carried triumph. Recorded this morning during what you claimed was a standard medical inspection. The footage continued. Marcus removing armor, the undersuit becoming visible. Liana's hand reaching toward the holographic representation of his Karos Gate wounds, trembling. Frozen there, the moment looked intimate, personal, completely inappropriate. An admiral, Kravik said slowly, conducting a private inspection of a junior officer. In her personal chambers, at 0600 hours, without medical staff present. He paused. Tell me, Admiral Veyrath, is this your idea of professional tactical reassessment? Liana's mind raced through responses, explanations, justifications. They all sounded defensive because they were. Captain Callahan underwent comprehensive medical evaluation using systems available only in flag officer quarters. The assessment was thorough and appropriate. The assessment looks like something else entirely. Kravik gestured at the frozen image of Liana reaching toward Marcus, expression unguarded. This looks like emotional compromise. My emotional state is not. Your emotional state is absolutely relevant when you're making decisions that cost us tactical advantage. Kravik's control cracked. You've become obsessed with casualty rates. You're delaying operations, second-guessing command decisions, and now you're conducting inappropriate private meetings with soldiers who embody everything wrong with modern combat discipline. Captain Callahan is one of the most decorated. Captain Callahan has been court-martialed 4 times for insubordination. He's a cowboy who ignores orders and gets people killed through recklessness disguised as heroism. He's saved more lives than any officer in his cohort by disobeying commands designed to achieve strategic objectives. Kravik stood, hands flat on the table. You want to build doctrine around that? Around soldiers who think they know better than command? That's not reform, Admiral. That's chaos. The chamber fell silent. Rourke studied Liana with something that might have been disappointment or pity. Admiral Veyrath, this council has concerns about your fitness for command. Your recent actions suggest emotional compromise affecting your judgment. Sir, we're initiating a formal competency review. Rourke's tone made it final. 72 hours from now, this council will vote on whether you remain fit for flag rank. Until then, you are restricted to advisory capacity. No operational authority. The words hit like kinetic rounds. Liana felt the floor shift beneath her. General Rourke, I respectfully dismissed, Admiral. The word carried command weight that couldn't be argued with. Liana held Rourke's gaze for 3 seconds, measuring, then snapped a perfect salute and walked out. Behind her, she heard Kravik's voice, low and satisfied. 72 hours. Then we end this. The observation deck was empty at 2300 hours. Liana stood at the main viewport, forehead pressed against the cold glass, watching Earth rise over Mars's horizon, blue and white and impossibly distant. Home, or the memory of home. She'd been in space so long that gravity felt like a punishment. She'd spent the last 16 hours reviewing her defense, running scenarios, building arguments. Every approach led to the same conclusion. The council wasn't interested in data. They wanted compliance. And she'd stopped being compliant 3 months ago. Scuttlebutt says you're in trouble. Liana didn't turn, recognized Marcus's voice, the careful Montana accent that flattened vowels into pragmatism. Scuttlebutt is optimistic. I'm in considerably more than trouble, Captain. Marcus moved beside her, not quite close enough to be inappropriate, not quite distant enough to be purely professional. He'd changed out of uniform into off-duty casual. Made him look younger, more human. Because of me, he said quietly. Because I chose to acknowledge reality. Liana finally looked at him. Don't apologize for that. Wasn't planning to, just stating facts. Marcus studied Earth's slow rotation. Kravik visited me this afternoon, made an interesting offer. Let me guess, testify against me, get promoted? Major, full pension guarantee, first choice of assignments. Marcus smiled without humor. Man knows his leverage. Liana's chest tightened. Of course Kravik would try that. Isolate her, remove her support. Standard tactical doctrine. What did you tell him? That I'd consider it. The words landed like plasma burns. Liana kept her expression neutral, but something inside her cracked. Of course. Why wouldn't he take the deal? She was offering him risk and probable failure. Kravik was offering everything a career soldier wanted. I understand, she said carefully. You should do what's best for— Relax, Admiral. I lied. Marcus pulled out a small data chip, turning it over in his fingers. He threatened to expose Titan Station if I didn't cooperate. Said the families of the 847 deserve to know you chose speed over evacuation. He met her eyes. Figured you should know what's coming. The fear she'd been carrying for 6 months crystallized into certainty. Kravik knew. They all knew. The one decision that haunted her every night was about to become public record. How did they— Classified mission logs aren't as secure as command thinks. Someone with access pulled your decision timeline. Marcus handed her the chip. Recording of Kravik's offer. Not admissible in any hearing, but shows his play. Liana took the chip, fingers brushing Marcus's. You recorded a vice admiral making a coercive offer. Seemed relevant to document. That's incredibly dangerous, Captain. Yeah, well, Marcus shrugged. Been dangerous before. They stood in silence, watching Earth turn. Somewhere down there, families waited for news about sons and daughters deployed in conflicts they barely understood. Committees debated appropriations. Politicians made speeches about sacrifice and duty. And up here, 2 people tried to figure out how to make it mean something. I keep a list, Marcus said suddenly. Names of soldiers who died under questionable orders. Started it after Karos Gate, when I realized that 43 civilians surviving meant 87 soldiers dying. He pulled up a holographic display from his personal log. Names scrolled in alphabetical order, 83 of them. I'm not the only one keeping count, he continued. Every combat veteran I know has some version of this. We all remember the orders that didn't make sense. The decisions that cost friends because someone prioritized something other than keeping people alive. Liana stared at the names. Some she recognized from casualty reports she'd reviewed. Others were unfamiliar. All were people who died because command made choices from orbit. Why show me this? Because you're the first flag officer I've met who seems to understand that these aren't just statistics. Marcus closed the display. Kravik and Rourke, they see acceptable losses. You see 847 people at Titan Station. That distinction matters. It matters enough to end my career. Maybe, or maybe it matters enough to change how we do this. Marcus turned to face her fully. What you said this morning about needing someone who survived questionable orders to help write better ones? I'm in. Liana felt something shift. Not hope exactly, more like possibility. The council votes in 72 hours. We don't have time to. Then we don't convince the council. We force their hand. How? Marcus smiled, and for the first time since this started, Liana saw the soldier who'd survived 12 impossible campaigns. We prove the doctrine works. Real time. Public record. Make it so obvious they can't ignore it. Captain, there are no active operations scheduled. Then we find one, or we wait for something to happen. Wars don't stop for council votes. Marcus's intensity matched her own. You've got data showing modified orders will work better. I know 3 officers from my network who can execute field operations better than any textbook protocol. Put it together, we've got a case. Liana ran through the logistics, tactical problems, political minefields, the 1,000 ways this could fail spectacularly. Then she thought about Titan Station, the 847 names she couldn't stop seeing, the 89 scars on a soldier who'd spent half his life bleeding for orders that had never considered him. If we do this, she said carefully, and it fails, we both end up court-martialed, dishonorably discharged. Everything we've worked for, gone. And if we don't do it, we end up being the people who knew better and did nothing. Marcus's voice softened. I've faced worse odds, Admiral. This isn't a firefight you can shoot your way out of. No, it's something harder. He met her eyes. It's command finding its conscience. That requires different courage. Liana studied him. 32 years old, 89 scars, a list of 83 dead soldiers, and somehow still believing change was possible. She'd spent 12 years perfecting professional detachment. Time to close that distance. We'll need testimony, field commanders who can speak to successful protocol modifications. Real examples, documented outcomes. I know 3, all aboard Citadel for refit cycle. We'll need tactical models showing long-term strategic advantage. Already ran preliminary numbers, can detail them in 8 hours. And we'll need to be ready when the crisis comes. Liana pulled up fleet deployments, because something always goes wrong. They worked through the night. Marcus contacted his network. Lieutenant Brennan Ashford from the Caros Gate operation, now commanding his own squad. Commander Siobhan O'Malley, the pilot who'd been grounded for refusing a suicide run that would have killed her entire squadron for minimal tactical gain. Sergeant Declan Thorne, who still had nightmares about the civilian massacre he couldn't prevent when orders prioritize asset denial over protection. Liana compiled data, combat logs from 47 modified operations, casualty comparisons, long-term retention rates of experienced soldiers versus constant replacement cycles, economic analysis of training costs versus preservation investment. Together, they built something that looked less like a defense and more like a revolution. At 0400 hours, exhausted but functional, they reviewed their work. Callahan Doctrine. Marcus read the label she'd attached to their framework. You named it after me. You're the proof it works. Liana gestured at the comprehensive data model rotating in holographic space. 16 years of surviving by knowing when to modify orders. That's the foundation. But the execution will come from you and your network, Ashford, O'Malley, and Thorne. 4 officers who understand that following orders and achieving objectives aren't always the same thing. Council's going to hate that. Undoubtedly. Good, Marcus grinned. Rather be hated for something real than praised for going along. The observation deck's alert system chimed. Priority notification. Fleet-wide. Liana pulled it up, and her blood went cold. Frontier alert. Vega colony enemy. Fleet detected. 18 ships, civilian population, 18,000. Time to engagement, 47 minutes, council convening for tactical response. Marcus read over her shoulder, whispered, There's your crisis. Liana's mind raced through scenarios. Vega colony, 40 million kilometers from the nearest fleet position. Mining operation, minimal military presence, 18,000 civilians including families. Standard protocol for this situation was brutally clear. Evacuate military assets. Use colony as bait to ambush enemy fleet while they're occupied with ground assault. Efficient, tactically sound, approved doctrine, and guaranteed to kill 18,000 people. Her personal comm activated. Kravik's face appeared, expression carefully neutral. Admiral Veyrath, your presence is required in the council chamber. We need all tactical input for Vega response. Translation, they wanted her there when they ordered the massacre, so she couldn't claim she'd been excluded. On my way, Admiral. She closed the comm, looked at Marcus. This is it, he said quietly. Standard protocol or your doctrine. Choose now. Liana thought about Titan Station, the 847 names she couldn't forget, the 89 scars on a soldier who'd survived because he kept choosing people over efficiency. She thought about 12 years of optimizing war, making it cleaner and more efficient and just as deadly. And she thought about a list of 83 soldiers who died under questionable orders, kept by a man who refused to forget them. Get Ashford, O'Malley, and Thorne to the Tactical Operations Center, she said. Have them ready to execute modified protocols on my authorization. Admiral, you don't have operational authority right now. I will in 47 minutes, Liana's voice hardened into command steel. Because when that council starts debating acceptable losses at Vega, I'm going to give them a choice they can't refuse. Marcus smiled. That's my admiral. She left him on the observation deck and headed for the council chamber, where 13 officers waited to debate the value of 18,000 lives against tactical advantage, where Kravik waited with his threat to expose Titan Station, where Rourke waited with his disappointment in her emotional compromise, where 72 hours of competency review was about to compress into one decision that would define everything. Liana walked through the Citadel's corridors, past soldiers who saluted without knowing their entire doctrine was about to change, past memorial plaques listing names of the fallen, past viewports showing Mars and Earth and the vast darkness between. She'd spent 12 years learning to command from orbit. Time to learn if she could lead from the ground. The council chamber doors opened. Admiral Liana Veyrath walked in alone. But behind her, building like pressure before a storm, was something command hadn't seen in 50 years. A flag officer who had decided that remembering costs was more important than ignoring them. And 47 minutes to prove it. The chamber doors sealed. The War Council began. And in orbit above Mars, 18,000 civilians on Vega Colony went about their morning, unaware that their survival had just become the test case for humanity's conscience. The tactical display painted Vega Colony in false colors, blue for civilian population centers, green for military installations, red for the approaching enemy fleet. 18 ships moving in attack formation, velocity optimized for maximum destructive impact upon arrival. Time to engagement, 43 minutes. Admiral Liana Veyrath stood at the war table, surrounded by the council. Holographic projections rotated slowly, showing every angle of the approaching catastrophe. Probability matrices calculated outcomes. Casualty projections updated in real time. The numbers were merciless. General Rourke's fingers moved through the tactical display, isolating key points. Vega Colony has minimal defensive capability, 2 orbital platforms already compromised. Ground forces insufficient for sustained resistance. He looked up, meeting Liana's eyes. Standard protocol applies, and Liana knew what that meant, had memorized it years ago. Standard protocol for indefensible colonies states that military assets evacuate to preserve fleet strength while enemy forces engage the colony. Kravik's voice carried satisfaction. We use their distraction to position our fleet for optimal ambush. Enemy commits to ground assault. We eliminate them from superior tactical position. That protocol assumes the colony is lost regardless, Liana said quietly. It is lost regardless. Rourke's tone allowed no argument. 18,000 civilians cannot be evacuated in 43 minutes. The transport capacity doesn't exist. We save who we can save, the trained military personnel, and we use the tragedy to eliminate the threat permanently. Admiral Sutherland pulled up logistics data. We have 4 heavy transports in range. Maximum capacity, 800 personnel per ship. That's 3,200 total, assuming we skip all safety protocols and pack them like cargo. Her expression was carefully neutral, which leaves 14,800 civilians. The number hung in the air like an accusation. Unless we delay the enemy engagement, Liana said. Every head turned toward her. Delay how exactly? Kravik's smile was predatory. You planning to ask them nicely to wait while we evacuate? I'm planning to use fleet assets to create a defensive perimeter that makes ground assault costly enough to slow their approach. Give us time to run continuous transport cycles. Rourke's eyes narrowed. You're suggesting we risk capital ships to protect an indefensible colony. I'm suggesting we commit resources to save American lives. That's not how war works, Admiral Veyrath. Perhaps it should be. Liana pulled up her own analysis, data she'd been preparing for 3 months. Standard protocol saves 3,000 military personnel and positions us for optimal enemy elimination. Estimated friendly casualties, minimal. Enemy casualties, total fleet destruction. Tactical efficiency, 94%. She paused, letting them absorb the numbers. My analysis suggests an alternative. We commit 6 cruisers to defensive action, creating a barrier that forces the enemy to engage our fleet before reaching Vega. Simultaneously, we run continuous evacuation cycles using every transport in range, including commandeered civilian vessels. She expanded the projection. Estimated friendly casualties, 900 military personnel. Enemy casualties, total fleet destruction. Civilian casualties, 0. The silence that followed felt like vacuum. 0. Kravik's voice dripped contempt. You're guaranteeing 0 civilian casualties while risking 900 trained soldiers? I'm accepting 900 military casualties to save 18,000 civilians. Admiral, that's the exchange rate. The exchange rate of emotional compromise. Kravik stood, hands flat on the table. You want to throw away 900 professional warriors? People who chose to fight, to save 18,000 civilians who contribute nothing to strategic capability? They contribute everything to why we're fighting. Rourke raised a hand, forestalling Kravik's response. His expression was unreadable. Admiral Veyrath, you understand what you're proposing. Deliberately accepting higher military casualties, risking capital ships, potentially allowing enemy escape if the defensive perimeter fails. All to save people who, strategically speaking, are already lost. They're only lost if we abandon them, sir. We're not abandoning them. We're making a rational allocation of resources in an impossible situation. There's nothing rational about deciding 14,800 people are acceptable losses when we have the capability to save them. At the cost of 900 soldiers, Kravik's control finally cracked. You're asking trained warriors to die protecting people who will never fight, never contribute, never justify the blood we spend. Liana turned to face him fully. I'm asking soldiers to do what soldiers are supposed to do, Admiral Kravik. Protect those who cannot protect themselves. That's not waste. That's purpose. The war table between them crackled with holographic static as the enemy fleet continued its approach. 39 minutes now. Rourke studied Liana with something that might have been respect or resignation. You realize this council was convened to assess your fitness for command. You realize we have evidence of emotional compromise, questionable decisions, inappropriate conduct. He gestured at the tactical display, and now you want us to authorize an operation that violates 50 years of proven doctrine. I want you to authorize saving 18,000 lives, sir, by spending 900 others. By asking 900 to risk what they volunteered to risk. Liana's voice hardened. Every soldier in this fleet enlisted knowing they might be called to sacrifice. Those civilians didn't. They're miners, engineers, families. They have no choice in this. Neither do the soldiers you're sending to die for them. Yes, they do. Liana pulled up new data, personnel files, service records. Captain Callahan has identified 3 officers from his network who've successfully modified standard protocols in combat situations. Every modification resulted in lower casualties with comparable mission success. Combined with his own field experience, they're ready to execute a defensive perimeter operation right now. Kravik laughed. Callahan, of course. The insubordinate cowboy who thinks orders are suggestions. This is what your doctrine produces, Admiral? Soldiers who ignore command? Soldiers who understand that command's job is to set objectives, not dictate methods. Liana met each council member's eyes in turn. We tell them what to achieve. They tell us how to achieve it without unnecessary death. That's not insubordination. That's tactical expertise we're currently wasting. Sutherland spoke carefully. Admiral Veyrath, even if we accepted your strategy, the timeline is impossible. 38 minutes to establish defensive perimeter, coordinate evacuation, and extract 18,000 people through hostile space. 38 minutes if we authorize it now. Liana's intensity burned through the chamber. Every second we debate is a second we're not saving lives. Rourke stood, moving to the viewport overlooking the operations floor below. Hundreds of personnel working stations, coordinating fleet movements, monitoring threats. The machinery of war, efficient and practiced. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 4 decades watching people die for flag and country. I spent 30 years learning to make hard choices, Admiral Veyrath. Choices where every option costs blood, where leadership means choosing who lives and who doesn't. He turned back to face her. You're asking this council to choose 900 soldiers over tactical advantage that could save thousands more in the long run. I'm asking this council to prove that American lives matter more than operational efficiency. The words landed like ordnance, because ultimately that's what it came down to. Not tactics, not strategy, values. Rourke studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Admiral Veyrath, you are hereby restored to operational command for the duration of the Vega crisis. He looked at Kravik. We'll table the competency review until after we see the results of her approach. Kravik's face flushed. General, this is giving a flag officer rope to either save herself or hang herself. Rourke's expression was granite. Admiral Veyrath, you have authorization to implement your protocol, but understand this. If those 18,000 civilians die anyway, and you've spent 900 soldiers for nothing, your career ends. If the enemy fleet escapes and continues operations elsewhere, those deaths are on your conscience. And if this fails spectacularly, you won't just be court-martialed. You'll be remembered as the admiral who threw away trained warriors to prove a point. Liana met his gaze without flinching. Understood, sir. Then execute your orders, Admiral. Rourke's voice softened fractionally. And God help you. Liana turned to the communication station. Opened fleet-wide channel. Her next words would reach every ship, every soldier, every officer in the USC fleet currently in range. This wasn't just an operation order. This was a declaration. All vessels, this is Admiral Veyrath. We have a situation at Vega Colony, 18,000 civilians, 18 enemy ships, 36 minutes until contact. She paused, feeling the weight of every listener. Standard protocol would call for military evacuation and tactical ambush. I am ordering a different approach. Behind her, she heard Kravik's sharp intake of breath. All available cruisers are to establish defensive perimeter around Vega Colony. Priority Alpha, civilian evacuation. All transport vessels, military and civilian, are hereby commandeered for emergency exodus operations. We are implementing the Callahan Doctrine. She pulled up the tactical framework she and Marcus had built through the night, sent it fleet-wide. This doctrine recognizes that our purpose is not just winning battles. It's protecting the people who make those battles worth fighting. Today, we prove that American military strength is measured not by what we're willing to sacrifice, but by what we're willing to save. 35 minutes. Captain Callahan, you have ground tactical command at Vega. Coordinate civilian evacuation. Lieutenant Ashford, Commander O'Malley, Sergeant Thorne, execute your protocols. Make every second count. She closed the fleet-wide channel, opened a private line. Marcus, are you there? His voice came through, steady despite the chaos erupting around him. Present and accounted for, Admiral. Already on transport with Ashford and Thorne, O'Malley's prepping her squadron for defensive screen. You understand the odds. Always do, usually ignore them anyway. She heard him moving, shouting orders to others. 18,000 civilians, 6 transport runs minimum, 28 minutes of coverage required. We'll make it work. Marcus, don't. His voice softened. Don't apologize for giving us a mission that matters. Been waiting my whole career for this. The line went silent, but she could track his transport on tactical, see it burning toward Vega at maximum acceleration, arriving ahead of the defensive fleet to coordinate ground operations. 32 minutes. The council chamber had emptied except for Rourke, who stood at the viewport watching operations floor spring into organized chaos below. You're betting everything on one untested doctrine and 4 officers with questionable disciplinary records, he said quietly. I'm betting on people who understand that following orders isn't the same as being effective. If this fails, it won't fail, sir. Rourke turned to look at her. You sound certain. I am, because I'm finally asking soldiers to do what they do best. Not die efficiently, survive creatively. 28 minutes. Vega Colony's surface looked like controlled chaos having an argument with panic. Marcus hit the ground running, literally, boots impacting regolith as the transport's ramp deployed mid-hover. 18,000 people scattered across a mining colony built for 8,000. Narrow corridors, limited exit points, and a population that had 30 seconds ago learned they were about to be invaded. Lieutenant Ashford was already coordinating with colony administration. Young, efficient, carried the careful intensity of someone who'd learned tactical planning in actual combat rather than simulation. Captain, we've got families scattered across 14 habitat modules. Primary evacuation point is the main plaza, but it's a bottleneck. If everyone converges there, we'll have trampling casualties before the enemy even arrives. Marcus pulled up the colony schematic in his heads-up display, saw the problem immediately. 1 main plaza, 3 secondary access points. Math that didn't work, unless you change the math. We're not funneling everyone to the plaza, we're creating multiple extraction points. He highlighted 4 locations. Ashford, take Thorne and 2 squads. Set up evacuation staging at the eastern hab modules. Get families with children loaded first. O'Malley's squadron will provide direct pickup from those positions. Captain, that spreads our defensive capability thin. It spreads evacuation wide. That's the priority. Marcus moved toward the central plaza, where Sergeant Thorne was already organizing civilians into manageable groups. We're not defending static positions. We're buying time and moving people. Stay mobile. Stay flexible. Ashford hesitated for exactly 1 second, then nodded. Yes, sir. The kid was learning, 24 minutes. The first transport arrived. Commander O'Malley's voice crackled over comm. Ground team, this is Angel 1. I have 800 capacity and hungry engines. Load them up. The plaza erupted into organized motion. Families moving toward the transport, children carried by soldiers who'd been trained to carry rifles. Elderly colonists helped by miners who'd been working double shifts before the alarm. Marcus watched the flow, calculating. 800 evacuated per run. Transport cycle time, 14 minutes round trip to the fleet. That meant 6 full cycles to clear 18,000. 84 minutes total. They had 23. The math was impossible. Marcus keyed fleet command. Admiral Veyrath, we need more transport capacity. I can't extract 18,000 in 6 runs. Liana's voice came through, steady despite what she must be feeling. How many do you need? Every ship with a cargo bay and propulsion. Military, civilian, anything that flies. Stand by. 40 seconds of silence that felt like years. Then Liana's voice broadcasting fleet-wide again. All vessels capable of atmospheric entry, you are now emergency transports. Cargo bays, maintenance bays, anything with space and air, you use it. We're not leaving anyone behind. 20 minutes. The defensive perimeter began forming above Vega. 6 cruisers establishing overlapping fields of fire, creating a wall between the colony and the approaching enemy fleet. Beautiful, precise, and completely insufficient against 18 ships. But it wasn't about stopping them. It was about slowing them. The enemy fleet adjusted course, recognizing the challenge. Instead of diving directly for the colony, they split formation. 12 ships engaged the defensive perimeter. 6 continued toward Vega. Tactical logic. Overwhelm the defense, continue the assault. The first exchange of fire lit up space like lightning across void. Plasma cannons, kinetic rounds, energy weapons that turned vacuum into temporary hell. The USS Rampart, lead cruiser in the defensive line, absorbed the initial barrage. Shields flared. Its firearm held for 17 seconds, then shattered. Hull breaches cascaded. Atmosphere vented. 143 souls extinguished in the time it took Marcus to draw breath. He saw it on tactical, heard Liana's voice, tight with pain, but absolutely controlled. Rampart, fall back. Lexington, close the gap, hold the line. 16 minutes. On the ground, chaos refined itself into procedure. More transports arrived. Civilian cargo haulers, maintenance ships, even a mining barge that someone had jury-rigged for personnel transport. Not elegant, not comfortable, but functional. 800 loaded. Another 700. Transport launched, diving for orbit, dodging fire from enemy ships that had broken through the perimeter. One transport didn't make it. The mining barge. Too slow, too exposed. Enemy fire caught it mid-ascent. The explosion was brief, bright, final. 640 colonists aboard. Gone. Marcus forced himself to watch. To remember. Every casualty had a reason. Every death bought time for others. Ground team evacuated. 11,397 still on the surface. 13 minutes. Captain, we're not going to make it. Ashford's voice carried the careful control of someone realizing they're about to die. Even with all these transports, we need 18 more minutes. Then we buy 18 more minutes. How? Marcus looked at the enemy formation. 6 ships breaking through, descending toward Vega. The defensive perimeter holding but failing. Ships dying to protect civilians who might die anyway. And he remembered every time he'd modified orders. Every moment when protocol said one thing and survival required another. Ground team, new priority. We're not evacuating in orderly cycles. We're packing every transport to maximum capacity. Safety margins be damned. Ashford, get creative with space allocation. Thorne, enforce discipline, but keep them moving. O'Malley, already ahead of you, Captain. My squadron's going to do something really stupid. Define stupid. See those 6 enemy ships descending? We're going to fly right at them. O'Malley's voice carried the calm of a pilot who'd made peace with mortality. Draw their fire. Buy you 5 more minutes. Commander, that's suicide. That's service, Captain. Isn't that what the Callahan Doctrine's about? Knowing what to sacrifice and when? 10 minutes. Marcus wanted to argue. Wanted to find another option. Wanted to save everyone because that's what the doctrine promised. But war didn't work that way. Someone always paid the cost. The question was whether the payment meant something. Make it count, Commander. Always do. O'Malley's squadron, 12 fighters against 6 cruisers, accelerated toward the descending enemy. Impossible odds, tactical insanity. Beautiful and terrible, and completely human. They lasted 4 minutes. Drew enough fire that the enemy descent slowed. Created enough chaos that 3 of the 6 enemy ships diverted to deal with the threat. 79 pilots flew into that fight. 79 pilots didn't fly out, including Commander Siobhan O'Malley, who'd been grounded for questioning a suicide mission and chose to fly one anyway because it mattered. Those 4 minutes meant 3 more transport runs. 6,800 civilians loaded, launched, saved. 6 minutes remaining. 4,597 still on the ground. All transports. This is Callahan. Final runs. Maximum capacity. No exceptions. We're leaving in 5 minutes whether we're full or not. The ground teams moved with desperate efficiency, soldiers lifting children into cargo bays already packed beyond safety limits. Colonists climbing over each other to fit into spaces designed for equipment. Humanity reducing itself to volume calculations because the alternative was death. 3 minutes. Enemy ships reached orbital insertion position. Began bombardment. Not precision strikes, area saturation. They weren't trying to capture the colony anymore. They were punishing it for resisting. The bombardment fell like judgment. Habitat modules collapsed. Emergency shelters vaporized. The eastern section, where 2,318 colonists were still queued for extraction, took direct hits. Marcus watched the thermal blooms on tactical, watched the life signs flatline, forced himself to witness what his decisions cost. 2,318 casualties. Instant, unavoidable. The price of being too slow. The plaza took secondary fire. 40 colonists waiting their turn. Gone. Part of the Western Hab module collapsed, structural failure cascading, 647 trapped inside. Systems failing, no time for rescue. Marcus made the calculation in half a second, hated himself for it, issued the order anyway. All transports, final departure, execute now, do not wait. Sir, we still have people trapped. Now! The transports lifted, packed beyond any reasonable capacity, air recyclers screaming, structural limits tested, but rising, climbing through fire and case in enemy bombardment toward the relative safety of the fleet. Most made it. USS Patterson, destroyer repurposed as emergency transport, took catastrophic damage during ascent. Lost attitude control, 1,094 souls aboard, spiraled into Vega's surface at terminal velocity. The impact registered on seismic sensors colony-wide. Marcus watched it happen. Watched the tactical display update, Vega colony, civilian casualties. Bombardment 2318, KIA Plaza strike 40, KIA trapped in collapse, 647 unreachable Patterson. Crash 1094 KIA. Enemy fire during ascent, 695 KIA total, 4,794 civilian casualties, 13,206 evacuated. Not 18,000, not everyone, but more than zero. The enemy fleet, sensing the evacuation completion, ceased bombardment, shifted focus to the defensive perimeter, which had been holding them off for 23 minutes at the cost of everything. The USS Lexington died protecting the retreat, shields failing, reactor breaching. 312 aboard. The USS Defiant followed 30 seconds later, overwhelmed by concentrated fire. 231 souls. The defensive perimeter broke. Remaining ships executed fighting retreat. Enemy fleet pursued, sensing victory, and ran directly into the ambush Admiral Veyrath had been preparing for 23 minutes. The main USC battle group, positioned perfectly, using the defensive delay to achieve optimal firing solutions. Not the ambush standard protocol would have created. Something better, something that accounted for every second the defensive perimeter had bought. The enemy fleet lasted 7 minutes, complete tactical elimination. Zero escapes. As battles went, it was decisive. As victories went, it tasted like ash. Final casualty count scrolled across Marcus's display. Military 907 KIA civilian, 4,794 KIA civilian evacuated, 13,206. He stared at the numbers, tried to find meaning in the mathematics of death. 907 soldiers who'd chosen to risk this, 4,794 civilians who hadn't chosen anything except working hard in a dangerous place, 13,206 who'd lived to see tomorrow. Standard protocol would have saved 0 civilians and lost 0 military personnel. The Callahan Doctrine had saved 13,000 at the cost of 907. Marcus didn't know if that was victory or just a different kind of failure. But he knew Commander O'Malley thought it was worth it. He knew the crew of the Rampart thought it was worth it. He knew that somewhere in those 13,000 survivors were children who would grow up because soldiers decided protection mattered more than efficiency. That had to count for something. The council chamber reconvened 6 hours later. Casualty reports finalized. Damage assessments complete. Data processed. Numbers assigned. Admiral Liana Veyrath stood at the same position she'd occupied that morning. Alone. Waiting. The 13 council members reviewed their displays. Calculated. Judged. Finally, Rourke looked up. His expression was unreadable. Final casualty report from Vega operation. Military 907 KIA. Civilian 4,794 KIA. He paused. That's a military casualty rate 7% higher than projected. Yes, sir. Liana's voice was steady. And a civilian survival rate of 73% in a scenario standard protocol assessed as total loss. Yes, sir. Kravik leaned forward. Admiral Veyrath, those 907 soldiers died because you prioritized civilians. If we'd followed standard protocol, saved our military assets, and used the colony as planned, we'd have lost zero military personnel and achieved enemy fleet elimination anyway. We'd have also lost 18,000 civilians, Admiral, who were strategically irrelevant, who were American citizens. Liana's control held, but her voice carried steel. Miners, engineers, families, people who volunteered for dangerous work to support our expansion, trusting that we'd protect them if things went wrong. And when things went wrong, you wanted to write them off as acceptable losses. I wanted to preserve trained soldiers over untrained civilians. Those soldiers volunteered knowing they might be asked to protect others. Those civilians didn't volunteer for anything except working hard in a dangerous place. Liana's voice rose. 907 soldiers made a choice. 4,794 civilians had no choice. We saved 13,000 who would have died under standard protocol. That's not failure. That's what we're supposed to do, sir. Rourke raised a hand. Admiral Veyrath, you asked this council to prove that American lives matter. The question we must now answer is whether that principle justifies the cost. The question we must answer, sir, is whether we're willing to be the military that accepts 900 casualties to save 13,000 lives, or the military that saves 3,000 and abandons 18,000 as acceptable losses. Liana's intensity filled the chamber. I spent 20 years optimizing war, making it efficient, clean, and every optimization cost blood I never had to see. But I see it now. I see Commander O'Malley, who died buying 4 minutes for 6,000 civilians. I see the crew of the USS Rampart, who held a defensive position they knew was untenable, so transports could keep running. I see 907 names that will haunt me forever. She paused, collecting herself. But I also see 13,206 people who went home to their families, who lived because we decided they mattered. That's the legacy I choose. Not optimal casualty ratios, not tactical efficiency. Lives saved because we were willing to accept the cost. The chamber fell silent. Then the doors opened. No warning, no authorization, just sudden ingress of unauthorized personnel flooding into a supposedly secure council chamber. Civilians, thousands of them, filling the gallery, standing in observation sections, pressing against security barriers, all wearing colony identification badges. Vega survivors. Rourke stood. What is the meaning of... A child stepped forward, maybe 8 years old, daughter of a mining family. She walked across the chamber floor with the fearlessness of someone too young to understand protocol. She walked right up to Liana and held out a flower. Synthetic, the kind grown in underground colony gardens. My daddy says you're a hero. The words landed with more force than any tactical assessment. The child's father appeared behind her. Mining supervisor, 40 years old, face still showing burns from the evacuation. Admiral Veyrath, we're the people of Vega Colony, all 13,206 of us. We came to say thank you, and to tell this council that we understand what was sacrificed to save us. Another colonist stepped forward, then another, then hundreds, all speaking, all bearing witness. My daughter lived because Commander O'Malley flew at impossible odds. My husband survived because the Rampart held the line. My family exists because 907 soldiers chose to protect us instead of themselves. The testimonies continued. Not political, not rehearsed, just human beings acknowledging debt impossible to repay. And behind them, media cameras, transmitting live, broadcasting across every USC installation, every colony, every Earth city. This wasn't a closed council session anymore. This was the public seeing what command usually hid. Kravik's face flushed. This is highly irregular. This council is not... This council serves the people it protects, the mining supervisor interrupted. And those people are here to say that Admiral Veyrath did exactly what we trusted the military to do. She saved lives. Even when it was harder. Even when it cost more. Even when the efficient choice was to let us die. Rourke watched the scene unfold, calculated, recognized political reality when it manifested. Admiral Varath, he said quietly, the Council will vote on whether to adopt your Callahan Doctrine as standard fleet protocol. All in favor? The vote took 30 seconds. 7 in favor, 4 opposed, 2 abstentions. The Callahan Doctrine was now official USC policy. Liana felt the weight of it settle. Not relief, not victory, something heavier. Responsibility with teeth. Admiral Varath, you are hereby promoted to Fleet Admiral and assigned oversight of doctrine implementation. Rourke's voice carried formal weight. Make it work. Make it worth the 907 who bought it with their lives. Yes, sir. The council adjourned. The civilians departed. The cameras stopped transmitting. And Liana stood alone in the empty chamber, holding a synthetic flower from a child who lived because efficiency lost an argument with conscience. 6 months later, the Command Ethics Academy occupied an entire section of the USC training facility on Mars. Purpose-built, funded by emergency appropriation, staffed by officers who'd survived impossible situations by thinking creatively. Colonel Marcus Callahan stood at the front of the lecture hall, facing 200 young officers, future commanders, potential admirals, people who would give orders that others would die following. His responsibility now was making sure they understood the cost. Scars aren't shame, he said, showing his arms, the visible evidence of 89 injuries. They're proof you learned, proof you survived something that should have killed you, proof that someone somewhere made a decision and you lived through it. He pulled up tactical displays. Vega Colony, the defensive perimeter. The casualties. The Callahan Doctrine isn't about avoiding loss. It's about accepting the right losses. 907 soldiers died at Vega. Under standard protocol, 0 would have. But 18,000 civilians would have died instead. He met the eyes of his students. Command means choosing who pays the price. The doctrine just makes sure we choose honestly. After the lecture, Marcus found Liana waiting in his office. Fleet Admiral now, 5 stars on her collar, responsibilities that aged faster than combat. How's the academy? She asked, teaching future commanders to question intelligently. Going well. She smiled. I read your latest assessments. Casualty rates down 40% across all theaters since implementation. And mission success rates? Down 12%. The council reminds me of that weekly. They would. Marcus gestured to the wall where a memorial had been installed. 907 names, Vega casualties. Worth it? Liana studied the names, found Commander O'Malley, found the crew of the Rampart and Patterson, found all the soldiers who'd paid for her conscience. 13,206 people think so. That's not what I asked. She was quiet for a long moment. I visit Titan Station Memorial once a month, add flowers to 847 names. Last week I added these 907. Her voice remained steady. I'll never stop counting the paint, Marcus. That's the point. The moment we stop counting is the moment we lose our humanity. Marcus nodded, understood. Some scars were invisible but permanent. You changed how we fight wars, he said. That matters. We changed it. You proved it could work. Lost a lot of good people proving it. We did, but we saved more than we lost. Liana turned from the memorial. That's victory by a different measure. Slower, more painful, but sustainable. They left the academy together, walking through corridors filled with young officers learning to lead differently. Learning that optimization wasn't the same as wisdom, that efficiency could be measured in lives saved, not just objectives achieved. Outside, Mars' sunset painted the landscape in rust and shadow. 2 people who'd survived by refusing to accept that counting costs made you weak. Fleet Admiral Varath, Marcus said formally. Colonel Callahan. She matched his tone, then dropped it. Liana, my name is Liana. He smiled. Marcus. They stood in the fading light, watching the sun set on a military that had learned, slowly and painfully, that the strongest leaders were those who bore their scars and counted every life their orders cost. The future stretched ahead, uncertain, difficult, full of choices that would haunt the people making them, but different, better, bought with 907 lives, 13,206 saved, and 2 officers who decided that conscience cost less than distance. The sun set, The stars emerged, and humanity kept learning what it meant to fight for something worth the blood.